Hello and welcome to Studio Dialogues. In today's episode, I am in conversation with a very special guest. His name is Laurin McCracken and he's based in the USA. Laurin is very well known for his photorealistic still lifes and florals, amongst other subjects. After a successful career in architecture spanning 40 years, Laurin is now a photographer and a full time watercolorist. He is an award winning artist whose work has been exhibited in many prestigious watercolor societies and exhibitions across the world. In this wonderful conversation, you will get to know him, his thought processes, as he shares many insights that you just don't want to miss. Hi, Laurin.
Hello there. How are you today?
I'm good. It's really good to see you. We finally made it.
Finally, we have connected. Thank you for your patience.
No worries at all. I'm really happy to have you today because your work is really, I'm a big fan. It's lovely. And I love the range of, the objects that you can take into your paintings and create a feel and a mood. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you. So am I. Thank you.
Great. So I want to start with talking a bit about you, about your background and how you like your career.
Well, I could talk for days because I had a fabulous career as an architect for 50 years. I actually didn't draw a lot because I got in the management side of the business very early, and particularly in the marketing side. And so I was the head of marketing for some very large architectural practices, thousands of people. And I opened the London office for an architectural practice, and I opened the Tokyo office for another. I did those from an airplane. I didn't live in either of those places, but I got to travel a lot as an architect and had offices all over the United States. So it was a fascinating experience, and I would do it all again if I had an opportunity. But while I was going to college, and I went to some really fabulous schools in the United States. I started at Auburn University, which is a very large land grant college in Alabama, 30,000 students, but it had a strong military connection. And then I got a scholarship to go to Rice University in Houston, Texas, which is a very, very small, very elite private college. Then went into the military and then came back out of the military and went to graduate school. And I went to Princeton University for 2 years, and I have 2 more degrees from Princeton. So I have 4 university degrees. So, while I was at Rice, I was supposed to take a watercolor lesson. And the other option that was available to us was to take a printing class, etching, lithography, woodblock print. And I had drawn a lot as a child. And so I opted to take the print class and had a fabulous time. I learned a lot. And in fact, I learned a lot that actually helped me in watercolor later. And I'll come back to that. But later in life, I started thinking about the fact that I had never learned to watercolor. And all of my architect friends, they watercolored. And so when I was living in the Washington, D.C. area, I was living in a town called Alexandria, Virginia. And in Alexandria, on the Potomac River there is an old torpedo factory. They made torpedoes in the First and Second World War. But now it's art studios and art galleries, which is a much better use of the building, of course. And, so I used to go down there quite often because there were a lot of really good artists. And I saw a lot of really good watercolors. And I kept asking, where did you learn? Who taught you? You know, how do you learn to watercolor? And I got the same answer, that there was a school attached to the torpedo factory called the Institute. And one lady's name stood out, a lady by the name of Gwen Bragg. And so I signed up to take her course, but she was so popular, it took 18 months for
Whoa.
there to be a slot in her class. And so I was able to take 2 6-week classes on Sunday evenings for 2 hours. So you've got a total of 24 hours of instruction that I had. But that launched me as a watercolorist. I end up at the end of that period moving to Chicago. And while I still stay in touch with Gwen Bragg, I was no longer able to take classes from her. But she was really good at teaching the fundamentals of watercolor. What is a continuous wash? What is a broken wash? You know, all of these things. One of the things we forget is that watercolor is a very technical, process-driven medium. And that's why so many people have a problem with watercolor, because they go to the store, they see watercolors can be bought very inexpensively, very bad brushes, bad paint, bad paper, but it's available. And so for a few dollars, you can become a watercolorist. But if you don't know anything about the processes of how to load a brush, how to clean your brush, all those fundamental things, it becomes very, very frustrating and very, very difficult. And so everybody says, oh, watercolor is just so difficult, I can't do it. And it is difficult if you don't find somebody that provides you the basic instruction. And Ms. Bragg was very good about that basic instruction. And so I moved to Chicago and just kept painting on nights and weekends. And I took some classes at the Art Institute in Chicago, which is a famous art school, with a wonderful realist painter that taught there on weekends. It wasn't a credit course. It was just an adult education course, but very good painter. I learned a lot. And so I became really fascinated with watercolor. I was good at it. I knew I was good at it the minute I picked up I didn't have to think twice about how to move my hand, how to create a stroke. When somebody showed me how to do something, I could just do it. It's like it was always in my head and just need to be brought out. And so that's what Gwen Bragg did for me. She brought out all these talents that I had buried in my head and didn't even know they were there. So I've gone on to paint for several years, and while I was an architect, and it sort of transitioned out of being an architect over a period of 7 or 8 years, actually. And so now I paint full time. But I also come to watercolor a little differently than most of my friends that have come from the art side. The people say, well, you're an architect. That means that makes sense for all your realism. Well, it really doesn't, because as I said, I was in the management side of architecture and the marketing side. And so I didn't draw in for 30 something years, almost 40 years. But as an architect, you think about things a little differently than most people. For instance, I got to thinking about, why is a watercolor round shaped like it is? Who invented it? Where did it come from? It didn't just happen one day, you know. So I started reading, and I had a tough time finding that in the mid 1850s, there was a competition in England. Yeah, Constable and Turner and a lot of famous watercolorists invited more than a dozen brush makers from all over England and Scotland and Ireland to come up with a better watercolor brush, because the hog bristle brushes that they used for watercolor, I mean for oil, were good for a watercolor, but not very useful for for watercolor, and
Mhm.
they wanted to advance watercolor. You know, Turner, who is a very, very famous English artist, painted 10,000 oil paintings, but he painted 30,000 watercolor paintings.
Wow, yes.
He
I think
really
often
preferred,
often
huh?
these guys would make studies with watercolor for their
But
oil
yes,
paintings, right?
but Turner did finished paintings.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, for particularly for homes and things like that. Sure, a lot of people did it for study, but there were a constable, and a lot of these people did it for finished paintings also.
Okay.
So in that period, they had this competition. They invited all these brush makers, and one of the brush makers was able to get his hands on some Kolinsky uh, weasel hair from Russia. And he made this beautiful round, and it had a big fat belly. It came to a beautiful point because the weasel hair is tapered. It's one of the few hairs
Right.
that is tapered, and it bends. So it creates this lovely belly that fills up with water or fills up with paint. And when you put it in a round,
Yeah.
it maintains that shape. So
Point.
that's how a round came about. So I went and asked the people in Escoda, show me how you make a round brush. Why is it so important? And so they showed me. And so then I went and talked to John Cogley at the Daniel Smith Paint Company. And I said, John, what makes watercolor paint so special? And he took me back in his laboratory and showed me how they made their paint. And so I've been taking my watercolor friends to different manufacturers so we can find out how how do they make it, and what does the manufacturer recommend how to use that product.
Mhm.
And I found that most of them are using it wrong, because nobody has ever told us the right way to do it. So as an architect, you would do that. You wouldn't specify a particular kind of roof unless you had talked to that manufacturer and asked them about, is that roof manufacturing suitable for this type of building? And he would tell you either yes or no. And if he said yes, he would show you how to use it. But we don't think like that as an artist. We just think about creating the final product. And so I have spent a lot of time in my career studying the product, studying paper, for instance. Sure, you can paint on both sides of the paper, but the manufacturer does recommend that you paint on the side of the paper that you can read the watermark.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that is the recommended side.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't even know there's a watermark on their paper.
Okay.
And so they just pick it up and start painting on it. So anyway, there's a lot
No,
to learn.
it's really fascinating because when we start with watercolor, we don't do enough research, and
Exactly.
a lot of people don't actually. That's very true. And there's also the other obsession with material, with art materials. Some of us are holders, so it can
Oh
go the
yes,
other
oh
way.
yeah, sure.
It can
Yeah,
go the other way.
every watercolorist has at least 200 brushes, right?
Oh gosh.
So,
Seriously.
you may only use 4 of them, but you have them in case you need them. Yes.
Yeah.
Because we're
I
hoarders.
mean, even the pigments, I mean, they're just so irresistible. You just want to pick
Oh,
up and
absolutely.
buy more and more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but it's really fascinating to know how, your thought process was because of your career in architecture or otherwise. And you thought logically about this also, because often we think that art and logic are not the same thing, but there is a logic to even art, because you have to understand the process, you have to understand composition and many other
That's right.
things to really get before you start painting. So,
Yes.
which reminds me, I would love to know, about your process in a broad way, because I know you do very detailed paintings. But and first we can talk about your main subject, which is realism. I'd love to know a little more about realism because I mean,
Well,
I really,
I come to realism actually not through my architecture, but I come to realism through my photography. I've always
okay. Mhm.
taken photographs, and in fact, I taught photography at Princeton to the architecture students
Okay.
there as a graduate assistant. You had to take my class in order to have access to these huge dark rooms that the architecture department controlled. So in my taking of photography, got very, very interested in details and in textures and things like that. And so when I came into painting, it was pretty natural that I would paint things that have a lot of detail in them and that have different textures in them. I spent a lot of time learning how to paint wood textures, for instance. And on the other hand, I spent a lot of time teaching myself how to paint cloud textures because they are very elusive, you know. And most watercolorists just take some alizarin and drop it into wet paint and hope the blossoms make clouds. But Constable taught us how to paint clouds. And Constable used watercolor to teach himself how to paint clouds. And you can still see these paintings in England at museums. So that's how I got into realism. And then because I have so much university training, I took a lot of art history classes. Probably 4 years worth of art history and architecture history and all that. So you learn a lot about composition and all the things that impact the art side of your technical creativity from studying great artists. I mean, you think about the amount of time that Picasso, for instance, spent in the Louvre copying other artist paintings. And he didn't just copy them and say, oh, here's my copy of Poussin. He once he copied them, he just took what was important from that he learned from that and put it in his brain and went on to the next idea. And that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to assimilate all of these things. So when I am painting, I don't necessarily think about composition. I don't think about balance or proportions or movement or focus or the Fibonacci spiral and all those things, because they're always in the back of my brain. And this is also something that photographers learn is you have to take that photograph in an instant.
Yeah.
You don't have time to
Yeah.
work the golden triangle and the Fibonacci spiral and all that. It's either in your soul and your brain or it's not. And if it's not, that means you haven't studied art enough.
Yeah.
You haven't looked at enough art.
Yes.
And the best education anybody can have is to just spend time, either if you're in the right location, doing it at museums that show great art, or it's a poor secondary, but just get a lot of books on great art and study the illustrations.
Yeah.
I pride myself on the fact that my paintings are strong compositions. They grab you, they bring you into the painting, they lead you around the painting, they come to a focus, and then when they come to a focus, they pick you up and lead you around the painting again. It's not good art is not a static quality. It just doesn't bring you into the middle of it and have you sit there. It makes you work. And while you're moving around that painting, hopefully the painting tells you a story.
Mm.
And it may be a very, very simple story. It may just be, these are really handsome objects that I've put together in an artistic way. And because there's a magnolia in it, you know, I did it in the spring. And it may not be any more complex than that. You know, it could be about conflict. It could be about Napoleon losing the Battle of 1812, but that doesn't have to be that heroic or grand.
That's
Uh,
beautiful.
you know,
Yeah.
you could paint a simple walnut and it could be a fabulous piece of art.
Mhm.
And I think of Dürer, who's one of my heroes. One of probably his most famous painting is the little watercolor of the rabbit. You know,
Yes.
everybody knows it. If you don't know Durer's rabbit, then you are seriously lacking in your art education.
It's a little difficult not to know it, but
That's right. But you know, that simple rabbit tells a very complex story. It's about light, it's about texture, it's about the fact that he saw value in that small rabbit, and it was worth his time to spend that much time recording it so that we today know all the details about that rabbit that we need to know. And he did that about a lot of things. And down through history, of course, in watercolor, realism has been the central thing. That, you know, let's face it, there are people that paint abstract paintings in watercolor, and I champion that. I think more people should do that because the medium is wide open for it. But the history of watercolor is realism, and most people still paint in some form of realism. Now, realism is a broad gamut.
yeah.
Realism isn't just hyperrealism, like way over here. And I'm not even a hyperrealist.
Yeah.
I'm just, I have a high degree of realism, but realism can be over here. The house can just look like a house, but the house can also have this many windows, and some of them can be cracked, and some of them have texture on it. The more you move into
Yeah.
that extreme realism, uh, and that's a result of what you, the artist, see when you look
Yeah.
at your subject. You
Yeah.
have to be able to see the detail, the greater detail, and the greater detail. And most people, quite frankly, don't take the time to do that. You
Yeah.
know, they want to see something, they want to draw it, and they want to paint it. But that's why uh, I take a lot of photographs before I do my still life, uh, and I may spend 4 to 6 hours drawing uh, that
Wow.
still life. And
Okay.
most people just want to spend 5 minutes
Yeah.
drawing, you know, and I spend 4 hours tracing the image when I project it. And then I may spend another 3 hours adding details when I get it to my drawing board.
Yeah, because
Uh,
looking at your work, I've been very fascinated about the level of, the degree of details in it. And in fact, that was one of my questions I wanted to ask you, how you achieve that state of detail, so correctly. So I guess that answers my question.
well, I think that one of the other answers to your question is you think about this as that for one day, that's your painting. That's not the painting for that day. You decide one day that that little piece of
Mhm.
silver is what
Mhm.
you're going to paint that day. And you may not get all of it painted in one day. And so you may paint the lid and the top one day and the handle one day, and then the next day paint the belly of it.
Mm.
And most people don't think of watercolor like that. You
Yes.
know, you have to concentrate on one thing, and again, you have to see that detail. And if you can't see that detail, you can't draw it. But once you see it and you draw it, then you can paint it. I often point out that a lot of people can't see the forest for the trees, right? That's a very famous old saying. But I'm the guy that sees the trees in the forest. I see the limbs on the trees. I see the leaves on the limbs on the trees. I see the veins in the leaves on the on the leaves on the limbs of the tree. And but that takes time. It takes energy, and you have to want to do it. And if that doesn't interest you, that's fine. Doesn't bother me at all. Doesn't mean you aren't a great artist. It just means everybody has their personal style that they bring to the medium of watercolor. And one of the great things about watercolor is that it responds to all of those styles, and you can do fabulous things with it.
Yes, absolutely. It's amazing.
All watercolor doesn't have to be light and streaky and all that. But if you're really good at it, a light streaky painting can be fabulous.
Yes.
Unfortunately, a lot of them aren't, because they haven't practiced enough, they haven't looked enough, they haven't seen enough great art. So there's a lot to learn. And let me suggest that there are just a few artists out there that our audience today might think about, that they might have spent time with. And one of them, of course, is Albrecht Dürer, who was living in Nuremberg, Germany, at the height of the Renaissance in Italy. The Renaissance hadn't reached Northern Europe yet. So he was the first Renaissance artist of Northern Europe. And his detail as a printer, he did etchings and woodblock prints and that sort of thing, as well as oil paintings, and did a lot of watercolor. He was one of the first true watercolorists. And so look at Albrecht Dürer and look at his detail. And then look at the Dutch painters of the 16th and 17th century. Those are my heroes. When I want to be inspired, I either go to a museum that has Dutch still life painters, or I pull out my mini books. I have a big library of Dutch still life paintings. And look particularly at a man named Willem Kalf. It's Willem Kall. Willem Kalf. We would say William Calf, but in the Dutch, look at his paintings, and then think about, go see some of my paintings, and you'll see that I have a very good teacher in Mr. Kalf. And that's how I came to the black backgrounds, because he painted these really dramatic still lifes with these really, really dark backgrounds. And so I decided that I would try to do that, to add that level of drama to my paintings. I have written a little piece on the history of realism, and we're going to post it on the Fabriano forum. So that should be up in another month or so. It's too much it's too much detail to go into in the time we have today, but I encourage people to look at it, because realism's been around since the Greek and Roman times, and it's still with us today. And so let me suggest one of the great modern realist painters, who was a watercolorist, as well as he painted in oils and acrylics. But his early work, and his name is Ralph, R-A-L-P-H, Ralph Going, G-O-I-N-G-S, Goings, has an S on the end of it. But Ralph Goings is, I was going to do, you go into a small cafe, and then there's sugar and salt and pepper and mayonnaise and mustard on the table. A little cafe still life. and I was going to paint some of those. And then I was introduced to Ralph Going's paintings, and I said, no, he did it so well. There's no reason for me to do it.
Yes.
If I can't advance art, there's no reason for me to spend time over there. And Ralph Goings has already done it very, very well. There's a famous watercolorist. She's passed away several years ago, but her name is Carolyn Brady, Brady, and an American. And she probably did as fine realism as anybody did. She was famous for both florals and for tabletop dinner, what I would call lunch and dinner still lifes. The table before the meal, during the meal, and after the meal. All the mess and all the details and all the dirty silverware. It's terrific. So people should look at those 4 or 5 people if they want to see the very best of realism. And the good news is today we have some fabulous realist painters painting out there. You know, the Angus McEwens and the people like that. So don't forget them also.
Right. Good. So that's very fascinating because you know, I think realism really works when you get the story right. When you have the story there and the drama, I think it works beautifully because it just grabs your attention and, you know, gets you. There's so many things in the painting that, you know, you can spend time over it. It's not like a quick thing that you see it and you move on. So I guess that's what we're talking about, where, you know, you try to capture those details and the story in it. Oh, wow.
It doesn't have to be something that's beautiful, or these are just a couple of pears wrapped in a plastic bag.
But that's beautiful. That is beautiful.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I enjoyed painting this. I enjoyed setting up the still life. It was a challenge. But and it was difficult to paint. I mean, it took a lot of hours to paint this simple painting.
Yeah, because I enjoy still lifes myself, but I would say that I'm still a baby at it because I really haven't started, you know, setting up my own great still lifes and experimenting with that. So in fact, just, you know, if not for our viewers, just for me, I would love to know what are the basic things one have to have when setting up a still life and what makes it work.
Well, the great thing about doing a still life, particularly today in the time of our very sophisticated little electronic cameras, it used to be very expensive, you know, because you had to worry a lot about whether you were going to take that particular picture or the next one. But today you can just take hundreds of them. I take lots and lots and lots of photographs when I do my setup. For instance, I was trying. This is what I taught in my last class. Nice little still life with flowers and Chinese porcelains, but these are the photographs, and these are just some of the photographs I took, and then put these in in my computer, and then narrowed it down to the 6 that I thought might work the best. Because just because you have a good photograph doesn't mean you're going to have a good painting. Sometimes the photograph is better than the painting will ever be. So you have to find the one that is not only a good photograph, but one that will translate into watercolor. And so, and then after I did all of that, then I made the choice of, I thought this was the one, because the way the flowers bring you into the painting, your eye travels around, it comes back to here, and then it's led back up and led back around. And when you come down, you can't go off the sheet because the lace and the shadow turn your eye again. Then they catch the cup and bring you back into it. So you can't, once you're in it, you're in constant motion in the painting.
And
so,
I think I think even without thinking, you have the necessary components of composition out there. The focal point and the Fibonacci sequence, for instance. I mean, the flowers make a beautiful spiral out there.
Yes, exactly.
It's so glaringly
Yeah.
obvious there. Yeah.
And so what you do is you just put everything on the table, and then take, without even working about it, just put it up there. Take that first photograph and say, okay, how can I improve this a little bit? And you move a couple of things, and it just gets better and better. And then you take out something, and oh, well, that's simpler, that's easier. That's even better. Oh, later you can put that back because putting it in the background added something. So it's not a static process. It's a process, and usually takes me a couple of hours to take these, but I'm just shooting. Bam, bam. Turn that cup a little bit to change how the light reflects on it. Bam. Turn that flower, because all the flowers are seen from the side, and I had one turn where you looked into the end of it. Well, let's keep them more consistent, because we don't want somebody to worry why that one is different than the other. So think like your viewer would. Ask questions of yourself. So does that help?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it also shows me one more thing, that if you do want to get a great still life, you can't just set it up in a minute. It has to take time, care, and a lot of mulling over.
Yes, I mean, yeah, you have to have the right props. You have to have the black background available. You have to have your lace. You have to have all your props available. But the interesting thing I found out in setting up all my still lifes is you really only need one light.
Okay.
And if most people bring 3 or 4 lights in, no.
Okay.
All of the still lifes through history have been lit by one source. What is that? The sun.
Absolutely.
And so still lifes work best when lit with one light.
I see. Okay.
See how complex this painting is? Yes. But it only has one light. Now over here, I needed to brighten it up. So I just put a piece of white paper over here and bounce some of the light.
So for dramatic lighting, I think you need that one source to create the contrast, I think.
Exactly. Exactly. And here's another. It's as complex as this is, it only has one light source. Beautiful. And so, and any big bulb, 300 watt or whatever, will work. I have very sophisticated lights that I use that I can adjust the temperature and all of that sort of stuff. But that's not how I started. I started with very, very, very simple equipment. And then I just, as I've advanced and needed more equipment, and I've sold paintings and so I can afford them, I have more complex studio than when I started.
Amazing. That's really interesting. So, I know you are part of a lot of international societies in the US as well as in other places, Fabriano, for instance. Yes. So I'd love to know more about that journey, and also a little bit more about the international forum where you are, a big part of something new coming up, as well as, how we can get more and more beginners to maybe, see that, view that, and learn a lot from that.
Well, I think that that it all goes back to me was that artists are very isolated. You can't paint. Nobody can paint on that painting but you. I mean, if 3 or 4 people want to paint a painting, that's fine, but that's not the norm, obviously. So most of us are very isolated in our studios, and we work very hard to create something of which we think has value to it. But how do we validate that? That's difficult, because you can't ask your friends, because your friends are going to say, "Oh, Sally, that's a wonderful painting. That's the best thing you've ever done." But they're protecting your ego. Your best friends, as you get into painting and develop real art friends, will be very frank with you and they'll say, Laurin, that's pretty good, but boy, those colors just don't work. You know, you didn't think that one through, you know.
Yeah.
Then you know you've got a real friend. So, so
Tremendous.
early in when I was just starting to paint, I didn't have any friends like that. So then I discovered the watercolor societies. We have about 125 watercolor societies in the United States. Almost
Wow.
every
Okay.
major city has one. There are millions of watercolorists that participate all over the United States. And most of them have two competitions a year. They have a members competition and then they have an open competition. And a lot of those are open to the whole world. Some are not. If the Florida Watercolor Society only has competitions for paintings for people that live in Florida.
I see.
Right. But states have, the state of Texas, for instance, has a big one. And well, let me give you two other examples. We have a pretty good sized watercolor society here in Fort Worth, Texas. We have about 300 people in that group. In Houston, they have a much larger one, which has about 800 people in its watercolor society. But each of those watercolor societies take entries on their international once a year competition from anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And people like Joe Tienya in China are now members of the National Watercolor Society and the American Watercolor Society and the Houston Watercolor Society because they've entered their competitions. And George Politis is a member of many, as is Angus McEwen, because that gives you, and we join those societies and we participate in their competitions to validate that what we're doing has value. And that's the primary purpose that people participate. Now, the secondary reason they participate is that all of these watercolor societies are committed to teaching beginning watercolorists and advanced watercolorists. Every meeting of the Fort Worth, it's called the Society of Watercolor Artists, and every meeting we have some artist come in and do a demonstration of some kind of technique. And so, and almost every one of them do. I give demos at Watercolor Society meetings, I teach workshops, I do all of that. And I do that to give back to all those people that have helped me learn along the way, you know.
That's really well put because, I mean, for me, the first big event I ever went to was Fabriano. And we not very long back, that was 2019. But I saw the world differently after that, especially the world of art. But in general, for me, things changed because it opened up so many doors and, you know, gave me insights into the entire art world. So, I mean, it's highly recommended that people don't just sit in their own spaces and paint. They should step out and take part in these events.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that, and those that that can afford it should go to workshops, should travel to workshops. I think that while COVID has been terrible for all of us, but the thing that it has shown us is that we can teach at distances, and tools like Zoom and things like that have opened up whole new worlds for us. We don't, I know that there are a lot of people in places in the world where they can't travel freely now can learn from masters through online teaching. And I think that's a fabulous thing. And I think even when we get back to in-person one-on-one teaching, the other won't go away. It will be institutionalized as a permanent part of art education. And I think we're going to see more and more one-on-one teaching out there and mentoring out there, which wouldn't be possible if we didn't have these electronic means.
Absolutely. I mean, there are people in the world who probably cannot afford to travel. So, if they want to learn from someone across the world, I mean, it's
That's
possible
right.
now. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely is. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
the
think
beauty of
that,
it.
you mentioned Fabriano, and Fabriano is a very unique
Mhm.
opportunity. And one of the things, I'm like you, when I went to Fabriano, I was just amazed. I was just saying, this is the best thing that ever happened to watercolor. And uh, Anna Massanisi and all of her wonderful people there who volunteer. I mean, nobody gets paid to
Yeah.
create Fabriano. Fabriano is almost free for everybody. And so all you have to do is show up, you know. Uh, uh, Anybody can come. You don't even have to be an exhibiting artist to come and learn
That's the beauty of it.
there. And, yes, and the fact that it is so egalitarian. It means that you don't have to be a famous painter, you don't have to be a rich person, you don't have to have status. You can just come and learn at your level because there's something there for everybody. I mean, right now the exhibition is in Fabriano, and we have, I think it's 1,080 paintings
Yeah.
displayed there, and they represent 82 countries around the world. I just think that is just the most fabulous thing.
Fabulous.
And now we've gone online with the watercolor museum platform, and
Mhm.
anybody can post on that
Yes.
post their exhibitions, they can post their workshops. And our goal is to make it the sort of encyclopedia or Wikipedia today of watercolor, so that if you have a question, you can go to the platform. And if you can't find an answer on the platform, you can at least find somebody to ask.
Yeah.
So the idea is that it just allows anybody to get better educated in watercolor with very, very little effort and
Yeah.
no money.
Yeah. I mean, even for an artist to be present on the forum is such a great opportunity.
Yeah,
It's kind of like you said, 80 countries are exhibiting in one place, and this is
yes,
worldwide. You can be
that's
anywhere in
right.
the world, and you can be
Right.
part of a big thing.
That's
So
right.
yeah, so that is really amazing, and I'm hoping for a lot of new things that come up, and it gets better and better.
Well,
So.
we're working hard on it. The last year was a difficult year because of COVID, and it took a lot of our time away from the
Mhm.
platform in order to do all this online. Uh, but I'm confident that we're getting back to continuing to populate the the platform, and the more people use the platform, the more valuable it would be. So I really
Absolutely.
encourage people, and we'll send out a link here to you so you can post that so everybody can find the
I
platform.
will. I will post the link here. Yes.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Uh, so I think that this kind of thing is happening all over the world. Groups of people are getting together to teach each other, to share information. I have 2 or 3 groups here in the United States. Uh, Let me tell you about one group I have here in Texas. It's in North Texas. We have about 15 artists, and we get together every other month, and we come to my house, and we come and we have a nice glass of wine or cheese and
Mhm.
bubbly water, and greet each other and share news. And then everybody gets to bring 2 paintings, and
Mhm.
then we critique each other's art.
Oh.
And so you've got people like Rance Jones and Michael Holter and Stephen Zhang. I mean, really fabulous painters. But we always have 2 or 3 beginning painters so that they can learn from these masters. And it's been really fascinating to see these people. We have a gentleman who is an engineer who just started painting, And so he comes and he's taken everything we've said very seriously. He paints a lot. He studies it. And now he's entering competitions and winning prizes. And he started just as a beginner with us. And that's just pretty fabulous.
That's great. I mean, I think we can go on and on about this. I mean, this is fascinating. And I think the kind of depth of knowledge you're able to share with me, it's not somewhere, you can get it easily. But I guess we have to think of the time, I guess. So,
yes.
But before we go, I want to ask you one more thing.
Sure.
And as how do I phrase this? I think what I want to ask is how does a person who's looking for their own style, who's in the process of discovering it, and people tell the person, like for instance, people tell me they're able to now maybe recognize my painting without seeing the name, but I know I'm not there because I'm not happy with it. To me, it's not
Sure.
me yet.
Sure.
So, how was your experience in that journey, and when did you know that this is you?
Well, actually, there is a very simple answer that takes a great deal of effort to do. And it's practice. But there is a corollary to that. And that is the definition of insanity. If you do the same thing every time the same way and expect it to be different, you'll always be disappointed. So you can't. And so what that means, in the middle of all this practice, experiment. Every time you do something different.
I see.
Use another color, use another brush, use less water, use more water, copy Matisse, do something different every time you practice that, and pick a subject, a simple subject, and paint it over and over again. One of the best things to paint to start with is eggs. Because eggs are, try to create a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional surface, because eggs are very three-dimensional. Yes. But also, because they're so white, they react to whatever light surround them or whatever you set on.
I've done eggs twice actually, so I think maybe I should do them with different objects together, and I've just done eggs by themselves, but sounds really interesting.
And then do 2 eggs, and then they 3 eggs, and then do 2 eggs with a cracked egg. I mean, it can get really complex. Then put your eggs in a basket, or better yet, put your eggs in a white bowl.
Oh yeah.
On a white surface, and then put the eggs in the bowl on a black surface and see how different that is. I've done all these things.
That is awesome.
And it teaches you to look, and it also teaches you how to use watercolor in ways that you didn't realize you could use watercolor. And then the most fabulous transition from there is white flowers. Small white roses, magnolias. That I started painting flowers early on. I started with eggs. I went to white flowers because it taught me how to do things and make them round, how to give them sharp edges when they need it, how to give soft edges, how the green leaves reflected on the underside of the white petals, all of those things. And so don't start with a great big group of 25 roses. Start with 1 rose, and start with a white rose, so you don't have to worry about which red is the right red. You're just painting in grays. So and for me, and I'll end this, you talk about my journey. My journey was through all of these flowers, because I use the flowers to practice all the techniques that I had learned and how to perfect them. And that did well for me. I mean, the flowers got in exhibitions, they won prizes, that sort of thing. They got published. And then I woke up one morning and said, Laurin, 4 million people paint roses.
Yes. Yes.
One of the things I learned in marketing, if you're going to be successful, you have to differentiate yourself.
Yes.
You have to find something that is your subject, something that nobody else is painting. So I looked around and what did I have around me that nobody else had? And I was living in Mississippi at the time, and a lot of my friends had this family silver and crystal. And of course, Mississippi is full of magnolias. So I combined the magnolias with the silver and crystal, and that's how I started painting silver and crystal. And my career took off because I had learned all the technical aspects through the flowers. And then I was able to apply them in a subject matter that not many people were doing. Now I'm at that point. Where am I going to evolve next? I want to paint trains, and I've started to take photographs of trains and paint some trains. I think trains are, very masculine, and they're very intricate, and they're very rusty, and they're full of steam and all kinds of interesting things. Now, whether I will do that or not, I don't know. I've painted some tractors. I've painted a couple of trains. So we'll see where my path leads me. And the great thing about your journey is that it's never over. It's always new and exciting. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your wonderful questions.
No, thank you, Laurin. I mean, and good luck to you with your journey in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.